Some wars begin with soldiers and weapons. Others start with whispers, pride, and a single reckless mistake. And in the quiet neighborhood of Rosewood Estates, the war began with a woman holding a clipboard, a teenage girl with a lemonade stand, and a gun that should have never left its holster. Rosewood Estates was the kind of place realtors bragged about. Rows of pristine houses with picture-perfect lawns, kids riding bicycles on safe streets, and neighbors waving politely on their way to work. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. But the truth was, under the surface, Rosewood had a queen, and her crown wasn't made of gold. It was a title she had given herself, president of the Rosewood Homeowners Association. Her real name was Margaret Kelly, but no one called her that anymore. In hushed voices, behind closed doors, people called her Karen, not the funny kind of Karen you see in memes. This was the dangerous kind, the kind who believed her rules were law and her opinions were commandments. Margaret was in her late 50s, with a stiff blonde bob, large sunglasses she wore even on cloudy days, and a habit of dressing in expensive floral blouses while carrying a clipboard like it was a royal scepter. She wasn't elected to run the HOA. There hadn't been a single vote in years. Margaret simply took charge one day, and everyone was too intimidated or too tired to fight her for it. Under her leadership, the HOA had grown into something like a private kingdom. She controlled neighborhood decorations, lawn heights, even the color of mailboxes. She once fined a family for parking their truck in the driveway instead of the garage. She threatened another for planting flowers she didn't like. If someone complained, she doubled the fines. But despite all that power, Margaret had one thing she hated more than weeds and her perfect lawns: newcomers who didn't follow her rules. And last week, a new family had moved into Rosewood Estates. Sarah Mitchell, a single mother in her 40s, had bought the small brick house at the very edge of the neighborhood. It had a wide porch, an old oak tree in the front yard, and a little garden Sarah planned to revive. She had moved here with her teenage daughter, Lily, and her elderly father, hoping for a fresh start. But there was one problem. Sarah's house wasn't technically under the HOA's jurisdiction. The original boundary line stopped 3 houses before hers. Her property was free from HOA control, free from Margaret's clipboard and fines. And Margaret hated that. For a week, she sent letters demanding Sarah join the HOA. She slipped notices under the door, taped official warnings to the mailbox, and left angry voicemails about neighborhood fees. Every single time, Sarah ignored them. To Margaret, that wasn't just defiance. That was rebellion. On the second Saturday after the family moved in, the sun rose bright and hot over Rosewood Estates. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of lawnmowers and sprinklers hissing over green grass. And that was a morning when Sarah's daughter, Lily, set up a lemonade stand at the corner of their yard. She was 16, with her mother's determined eyes and her grandfather's stubborn streak. She arranged cups neatly on the small folding table, made a bright sign in yellow paint, and set out a jar for money. To her, it was a simple summer idea, a way to earn some cash, maybe talk to a few neighbors, and feel like part of the community. But across the street, Margaret Kelly watched everything from behind her curtain. Her lips tightened. Not only had this family refused to join her HOA, now the daughter was running some kind of business on community property without permission. That was the final straw. Margaret grabbed her clipboard, threw on her sunglasses, and marched outside like a queen preparing for battle. Her heels clicked sharply on the pavement as she crossed the street, the sun flashing off the metal rings of her binder filled with HOA violation forms. Neighbors noticed immediately. Curtains shifted. A man paused his lawnmower. 2 kids stopped riding their bikes. Everyone in Rosewood knew what it meant when Margaret walked fast with that look on her face. Trouble. She stopped in front of the lemonade stand, casting a shadow across the table. Lily, friendly but firm, explained politely that they weren't part of the HOA and didn't know anything. She even showed paperwork, proving the house was outside HOA borders. But Margaret didn't care about borders or laws. Margaret cared about control. Her voice rose. She accused Lily of disrespecting rules, of breaking neighborhood standards, of embarrassing the community. People started recording on their phones from porches and sidewalks. This was better than Saturday morning TV. Then it happened. Margaret, shaking with anger, reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a small black handgun. Gasps rippled through the neighborhood. A mother across the street screamed for her kids to come inside. The man with the lawnmower froze. Even the birds seemed to stop singing as Margaret pointed the weapon toward the lemonade stand. The girl didn't move. Lily stood straight, heart pounding, but her mother had taught her well. Stay calm. Don't give them power over your fear. Behind her, the screen door slammed. Sarah stepped out carrying 2 grocery bags. She stopped cold when she saw the gun pointed at her daughter. One bag slipped from her hand, apples rolling across the porch. And as she straightened, sunlight caught the silver badge clipped inside her open handbag. The sheriff's badge. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a mother. She was the county's first female sheriff, a decorated officer with 15 years of service, and this woman had just pointed a gun at her child. Neighbors saw the badge. Whispers spread like wildfire. Margaret didn't notice. Not yet, but she was about to, because Sarah was setting down the groceries slowly, carefully, her eyes locked on the woman threatening her daughter. The summer air felt heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The neighborhood held its breath, and everyone knew this was only the beginning. Some people break the law, others enforce it. But when the enforcer is a mother and the lawbreaker is holding a gun in the middle of a sunny suburban street, what follows isn't just a confrontation. It's a reckoning. The moment felt frozen in time. Margaret Kelly, self-appointed ruler of Rosewood Estates, stood with her gun raised, the sun glaring off its barrel. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. Across from her, Lily stood firm, a lemonade stand between them, the bright yellow sign swaying gently in the breeze, as if mocking the tension boiling around it. And then there was Sarah Mitchell, mother, homeowner, and, though Margaret didn't know it yet, the county sheriff, lowering her groceries slowly, her eyes never leaving the woman threatening her child. Neighbors lined the sidewalks and porches, holding their breath. Some recorded on phones. Others whispered in disbelief. The queen of the HOA had finally gone too far. But Margaret was blind to reality, closing in on her. She didn't see the badge glinting faintly in the sunlight. She didn't notice the way people had stopped filming and started calling 911. She only saw defiance, a mother and daughter refusing to obey her HOA rules, embarrassing her in front of her neighborhood. She wanted control. And control, she thought, came from fear. Sarah stepped forward slowly, her movements calm but deliberate, the kind of calm that comes from years of training, the kind that comes before storms break. She told no one to move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because the entire neighborhood felt a shift in the air when Sarah's sheriff's badge slipped fully into view, catching the sunlight like a blade. Gasps spread through the crowd. Whispers turned into sharp murmurs. "She's the sheriff," someone hissed from a porch. Margaret froze for half a heartbeat, her eyes flicking toward the badge before snapping back to Sarah's face. Her jaw tightened. She was too proud to back down now, too angry to admit she just aimed a loaded gun at the daughter of law enforcement in front of 30 witnesses. Instead, she tightened her grip. That was the moment Sarah moved. She crossed the distance between them in 3 steady steps, her voice low but commanding, the kind that cuts through chaos like a knife. She didn't yell. She didn't need threats. She simply told Margaret to drop the weapon, each word calm, clear, and final. But Margaret didn't drop it. She tried to argue about HOA rights, about community safety, her words tumbling over each other as if rules she invented could erase the crime she was committing. And then the flashing lights appeared. 3 sheriff's department SUVs roared into Rosewood Estates, tires crunching against the perfect asphalt. Neighbors scattered to the sidewalks as uniformed deputies poured out, weapons drawn, voices sharp and professional. The street transformed in seconds, from a quiet suburban block into the center of a full-blown police response. Margaret's gun finally wavered, but she still didn't drop it. That pride, the same pride that built her little HOA empire, was eating her alive. She started shouting about being the president, about having authority, her words cracking as if titles on a clipboard could save her now. The deputies didn't care about her titles. They ordered her to put the weapon down. Their voices were steady, practiced. Neighbors recorded everything. phones catching the bright sunlight, the trembling gun, the furious woman realizing too late she wasn't the one in charge anymore. Margaret's hand shook, and then Sarah stepped forward again, this time with the full weight of law behind her voice. She told Margaret this was over, that she was done threatening families in this neighborhood, that she had just committed a felony in front of half the subdivision. The words finally broke through. The gun clattered to the pavement. The sound was small, but echoed through Rosewood Estates like a thunderclap. Deputies moved in fast. Margaret's arms were pulled behind her back, handcuffs snapping shut as neighbors gasped and whispered, some cheering under their breath. The woman who once fined people for painting fences the wrong shade of white was shoved into the back of a patrol car under charges of assault with a deadly weapon. But even as the car door slammed, Margaret shouted about conspiracies, about neighbors betraying her, about outsiders ruining her perfect community. Her voice cracked with desperation, echoing off the perfect lawn she once ruled. The queen of Rosewood Estates had fallen. But the story wasn't over, because while Margaret was driven away in the back of a police car, her loyal inner circle, the small group of HOA board members who let her run wild for years, stood on the sidewalks with hard, narrow eyes. They weren't cheering. They weren't relieved. They were angry, because for them, this wasn't just the arrest of Margaret Kelly. This was a humiliation of the entire HOA leadership, and they weren't going to forget it. As deputies gathered statements, as neighbors sent videos to news stations, as Sarah comforted her daughter with steady arms, those board members slipped away quietly, planning, whispering, watching the sheriff's badge on Sarah Mitchell's hip with a bitterness that promised trouble wasn't over. Because while Margaret sat in a holding cell downtown, her allies were about to launch a different kind of war, one fought with lawsuits, intimidation, and every ounce of petty power they had left. And Sarah knew it. She saw them watching. She knew this arrest was only the first battle in something much bigger. The kind of battle that didn't end with flashing lights or handcuffs. The kind of battle that would test how far the HOA would go to take back control. When pride is wounded, it doesn't disappear. It festers, sharpens, and waits for revenge. Margaret Kelly may have fallen, but the HOA wasn't done. And what came next turned Rosewood Estates into a battlefield no one would ever forget. The arrest of Margaret Kelly should have been the end. The video of her waving a gun at a teenage girl hit the local news within hours. By evening, the whole county was talking about the self-proclaimed HOA president who thought she was above the law, until the sheriff herself lived across the street. People laughed online. Memes popped up overnight. HOA Karen versus Sheriff Mom trended on social media. But not everyone in Rosewood Estates was laughing, because while Margaret sat in a holding cell, her loyal HOA board members gathered in one of their living rooms late that night. They were furious. Furious at Sarah Mitchell for humiliating their leader. Furious at the neighbors for cheering her arrest. Furious that the power they clung to for years was slipping through their fingers like sand. There were 5 of them, middle-aged, wealthy, used to getting their way. They weren't as loud as Margaret, but they were just as controlling. They liked their fences the same color, their lawns perfectly trimmed, their neighbors obedient. And to them, Sarah Mitchell wasn't a hero. She was a threat, because if one family could ignore the HOA, maybe others would follow. And so, as the neighborhood slept, they made plans. The next morning, Rosewood Estates looked calm again, but the storm was already building. Letters appeared in mailboxes accusing Sarah of harboring criminals because of her father's old unpaid parking tickets. Anonymous complaints flooded the county office about her house. Noise violations, landscaping complaints, even lies about dangerous dogs that didn't exist. The HOA board couldn't arrest Sarah, but they could drown her in paperwork, fines, and harassment until she either moved away or broke. Sarah recognized the tactic immediately. She had seen it before in small towns where bullies used bureaucracy like a weapon. But she wasn't just any mother. She was a sheriff. And she wasn't going anywhere. As the weeks passed, tension wrapped around Rosewood Estates like barbed wire. Neighbors divided into 2 camps. Those who sided with the HOA, convinced Sarah was destroying order, and those who supported Sarah, tired of living under HOA control. The lemonade stand became a symbol. Kids wore Free Rosewood t-shirts. Someone spray-painted HOA equals bullies on the sidewalk before dawn. News crews drove through, filming the perfect lawns hiding an ugly war. And at the center of it all, Sarah stayed calm. She fixed her porch. She helped her daughter study for school. She waved to neighbors who glared at her. But behind that calm, she gathered evidence. Every fake complaint, every threatening letter, every HOA meeting where board members whispered about making her pay. She knew what they were building toward. Because people like Margaret and her allies always made the same mistake. They thought intimidation was power. They thought fear was control. But fear only works until someone stands up. The breaking point came 3 weeks after Margaret's arrest. The HOA board called an emergency neighborhood meeting. Flyers appeared on every doorstep, demanding attendance. Rumors swirled about new community safety measures, about banning certain families, about taking back control. Sarah showed up early, wearing her badge on her hip this time, not hiding it, not this time. The meeting was held in the neighborhood park. Dozens of residents gathered under the fading sunlight as the board members stood on a small platform, trying to look official. Their speeches started calm but turned sharp fast, ranting about outsiders destroying traditions, about lawlessness spreading through Rosewood, and then came the line everyone would remember: "We have the right." One board member snapped into the microphone to remove families who refused to follow HOA rules. Gasps spread through the crowd, because everyone knew exactly who they meant. Sarah stepped forward slowly, her boots crunching on the gravel, the sheriff's badge catching the last rays of sunlight. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She told the crowd the truth, that the HOA had no legal power to evict anyone, that their harassment had crossed into criminal territory, that every letter, every threat, every lie had been documented. And then she announced what no one expected. The county was launching a full investigation into the Rosewood HOA for harassment, fraud, and abuse of power. The board froze. Neighbors erupted. Some cheering, some shouting in anger. But it was over. Within days, subpoenas arrived. Financial records were seized. Margaret's allies discovered that running an HOA like a dictatorship left behind a very messy trail. By the end of the month, 3 board members resigned. Margaret herself faced trial for assault with a deadly weapon, and the Rosewood HOA collapsed under its own weight. For the first time in decades, neighbors planted whatever flowers they wanted. Kids rode bikes without helmets if they felt like it. Someone even painted their mailbox bright blue just because they could. The reign of Margaret Kelly was finished. As for Sarah Mitchell, she kept her porch light on, her badge polished, and her lemonade stand open every Saturday. Because peace, she knew, doesn't come from rules written on clipboards. It comes from standing up when it matters. And if you were watching this unfold, tell me, what would you have done if the HOA came after your family? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and share this story. Because trust me, there are plenty more HOA nightmares you won't believe until you see them.